Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. Today, we are going to talk about the power of legacy, what we leave behind for our loved ones, not just in memories, but in something tangible they can hold on to. My guest is Lindsay Hurty, a Harvard-educated self-development specialist and the founder of Everwell and Self School, a writer and former high school English teacher. Lindsay helps clients write forever letters, end-of-life love letters that share love, wisdom, and connection. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Lindsay, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Traci. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, can you start off and share a little bit about your background and what inspired you to create Forever Letters?
Absolutely. So I come to this as a educator at heart. I was a high school English teacher and I loved that. And then I became a mom, which really shifted my life, and my career changed in that I started to educate adults more than high school age kids. And my area of expertise is self-development and helping people really lean into being the best versions of themselves, especially when these major life transitions happen during our lives, like becoming a parent. And that's really where I started my work at Everwell and my course called Self School. And one of the things I have always been and also do is that I'm a writer, and I love writing about becoming and all things adulthood, and especially with that little piece of parenthood that grows us in certain ways. And I started writing weekly essays that I publish on my Substack, and that's just a way that I connect with my audience. And one of my readers said to me not too long ago, "Have you ever considered helping parents like me?" She has kids who are older, they are out of college, they're young adults. And she said, "Have you ever thought of helping parents like me write a personal statement that could live alongside my will, that could be directed to my child?" And no, I had never thought of that. That was a totally new idea that had never come to mind for me. But when she said that, it was like that idea was meant to find me. I went so down a rabbit hole of exploration, trying to understand this part of legacy work. And I learned all about death work in general. That's how I found you, through my work in this. And I found that this is an area that is of great intrigue to me because I am someone who has been a letter writer my whole life. It has always been my preferred way to communicate with anybody. And I also really love connecting with people on a deep level and kind of going there really quickly. When I was a high school English teacher, I helped students write their college essays. And for a lot of them, that's the first piece of writing that they really care about, that they want to be just right and really express who they are in their lives. And that was my favorite part about being a high school English teacher, was helping them with the college essays, because it meant I would sit down with them and really ask them these questions about, what does it mean to be you? And how do you want to keep growing in this life? And the conversations were so good. So when this new idea came to me about helping people essentially write these end of life love letters, I realized it was a very similar kind of process. And so I baited the concept. I called it Forever Letters, playing off Everwell, my business name, but just imagining this being a letter that will live on in one's legacy, that's really directed towards your child. You write it before maybe you're even, you know, ill, but just more like I'm preparing for end of life. And this is one of the things that I want to make sure that I do, because so much of end of life, when we're thinking about our preparations, comes down to other things, a different kind of worth. It comes down to the value of our property and our home and our possessions. And I've always believed that the value of love surpasses all of that. And so this has become this rich little nook of a place where people can capture the worth of their loving relationship with their child. Well, that's how I started, but it's become letters in all directions. It's not necessarily just to one's child at all. But that's where that was the seed of it.
Now, for those people that do not know, um, can you define Substack for them?
Absolutely. It's an online platform that it's kind of like that podcast app you have, that little purple icon that takes you to this whole world of content that's all to listen to. Substack is like that, but it's where writers of all backgrounds and all kinds publish their writing. And so it's not necessarily people who have been discovered by these major publications that you know of, but they're people who are writers and really great writers. And so you can go into Substack and you can subscribe to them for free. You can subscribe to them. They have paid subscriptions too. And you can just create your whole own library of writers who you follow.
And there's all different type of content there. So if you like reading, go to it. It's a great resource.
Yes. And a lot of the people who have Substacks also have a podcast or they also have a YouTube channel. So if you do prefer to listen some of the times, often the content is in both places. I happen to have a YouTube channel too, but I I'm a writer first. It's my favorite way of communicating. Like I said, with writing letters, actually. Sometimes I feel like my Substack is just always a series of letters to my readers.
Nice. That's really nice. Thank you. So when we spoke last time, you told me the story of your great grandmother. And I absolutely love that story. I was hoping you could share it with everyone.
Oh, I would be happy to. So my great grandmother, her name was Anna Hanson Hayes. And I've always been told by my dad, who was her grandson or is her grandson, my dad's still with us, that we're kind of these spirit creatures together. I think she's sort of the ancestor that I come from mostly. She lived to be 101. I met her when I was very young, but I don't remember her, but I've heard of her. So through a series of events, I ended up going on a deep dive on the internet about her because she kind of came up in my mind. Did you want me to tell the whole thing
Please,
about?
please. I love it. This story is
Okay.
so
So
wonderful.
the whole thing. Okay, so for some this might get a little woo woo, but for me this really is like a powerful story. So election day 2020. So let's take us back in time. That was at the height of COVID. And, we were all waiting in line to vote 6 feet apart. And I was reading this book while I was in line called Cassandra Speaks by Elizabeth Lesser. And the concept of that book, which is an amazing book, is what would history be if women had been the storytellers? And I'm reading this book, and a bee lands on the page of my book. Now, this is November in Connecticut. This is not bee season. I happened to notice that she had landed there, the bee had landed there, and I just, took note of it. And I then go in to vote, and I felt this energizing thing of like, wow, it's a great day to be alive. Like, what a great day to vote. And I remember I said something to the town clerk who was there, didn't say anything to me. And I was just like, great day to be alive. Anyway, that election, we didn't learn the outcome for a few days. So we were all in limbo for a while, trying to wait to hear what was going to happen. The next day, I'm outside talking to a friend, and a bee flies by. And I noticed the bee, and I said, it's so weird. When I was in line to vote yesterday, a bee flew by. A bee landed on my book. And she was like, how weird. It's freezing outside. So I just noted it. And then a few days later, I was at a gathering outside, and it happened to be on the Sunday when the results of the election were announced. And someone yelled out the results of the election. And right then, a bee flew by. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is just the weirdest thing. What is it with this bee? And then suddenly I just started thinking about this great grandmother of mine, Anna Hanson Hayes, because, you know, she when she was young, she wasn't able to vote. And I feel like she was someone who actually took quite a political role in our country. She was the first national president of the PTA. Like she had this huge role. And so she was an educator. I was an educator. Like I've always felt a kindred spirit. And somehow she just came to mind with this bee. I'm like, I wonder like if she has something to do with it. I've always been kind of open to this idea of signs from those who have passed. I'm actually really open to it. But this was, I just thought of her, you know? And so then I have this friend who happens to be a medium. And I was through Everwell, I was planning an event where she was our speaker. And I was telling her this whole story. And I mean, she's clairvoyant, she's clairsentient, like she's a medium. Like she's got this incredible energy about her. She got chills all over her whole body, and which is her sign that something is real. And her inclination was that this was very much my great grandmother connecting with me. And I really felt like it was this very strong female energy coming to me, reminding me about how lucky I am to be a woman at this day and age and to just, to be alive. Like that's what I was feeling. And then like a day later, I'm with my whole family at a gathering and I'm telling my dad about this bee. And I think it's his grandmother. And he's just my dad. I love my dad. He's amazing. And he's kind of like condescendingly, like, kind of like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And right then, a bee flies around our table. I mean, his jaw dropped open. He couldn't believe it. I'm like, there she is. There's your grandma. Say hi. So, so that all happened. But because of that, I go on this deep dive about her. I'm so fascinated by her. Everything is this great grandmother. Like, why is she coming to me in my life? And the other piece of this is that I've always really admired bees. I had learned worker bees. I had learned at one point that a honeybee, a worker bee, in their whole lifespan produces an eighth of a teaspoon of honey, which I was so shocked by that. I was like, all that work, and that's such a small amount, like how easily I just pour the honey on my banana toast. And I'm just thinking about, I have such respect for anyone who works so hard to add to the collective whole. And so I'm doing all this research and I come across this audio from NPR, which is this series called This I Believe series, which was on the radio for decades. And it happened to have been a series that I used as an English teacher to model a writing assignment after, a This I Believe writing assignment for my 10th graders. I loved this writing assignment. Well, back in the 50s, she did a This I Believe on NPR. And it's recorded. I found it on the internet. I played it. And although she didn't talk about bees in it, she talked about the power of working hard and that we're all capable of contributing to this world. And I really felt like at that time in my life, she was just giving me this big message around keep pushing forward in your work, keep doing it. Because, honestly, COVID really was a setback for my business. So it was so empowering and incredible. And then I played this recording for my dad, who never even knew it existed. So can you imagine being almost 80 years old, the age of my dad, and hearing the voice of his grandmother from her voice when he was young, not her elderly voice, her younger, maternal voice. And he was just absolutely blown away to have that piece of her saved, preserved, and for him to have. And it wasn't a direct letter to him, but she was his grandmother. And I now think of that in the context of these forever letters. And it's not the same thing, but it's similar. It meant so much to him to have that of her. And so imagine if she had actually written a little love letter to him that he would have. I can only imagine how much that would mean to him. So
Kids today don't realize how fortunate they are to have these recording, to have their phones. Because back then, like my grandmother, she has passed on. All of my grandparents have passed on, but the one I'm thinking about passed on. And we've one recording of her when Oren and I got married. We had, we told our love story. It was like when Harry met Sally
Mm.
kind of take off. We had my parents tell their love story sitting on a couch. Oren's parents did the same thing. And Oren and I did the same thing. And then my grandfather wasn't there. She told their love story. And it's the only recording we have of her. And when she passed on, my entire family wanted copies of it because that voice, hearing her tell her story, and she came through so much. Her whole attitude came through so much and was just wonderful. So, you know, kids don't understand that sometimes we only have one recording, if that, of the people we love.
Mm. That I love that you have that. That is so special. Did you think of that as you were getting married? You just had that great idea?
Yeah, we had a very small wedding, so we were able to do that, and yeah, it was really cool. For those people who are younger, who've never seen the movie When Harry Met Sally, please do yourself a favor, just see it. It's really a great movie,
That's a
well
great
written.
story. And that's a wonderful idea for
Yeah,
legacy work. I think that that's so special.
yeah, it is.
Glad you have that.
I can say that we actually like watching our wedding video. So
Oh.
so that's a great story about your great grandmother, and I loved hearing it. And it is very special. So, as you know, legacy means very different things to different people. Um, how do forever letters help parents define and communicate their legacy to their children?
Well, it's something concrete that ex really just gets into the heart of what it's meant to be one's parent, what it's meant to love someone like that, and how you see them through your eyes, which is a unique set of eyes. A parent raising a child has a vantage point that no one else does. Um, and the child knows that. You know that your parent knows you differently than anybody else that we meet in life because they've been there throughout. And I actually think of this as such a joyful part of legacy because sitting down to just capture in a pretty succinct but clear way what that love has meant is satisfying and fun to actually put the words to it. And I know a lot of people consider themselves bad writers, or they just are scared of it. They don't like to do it. They've never felt good about it. But I can tell you that when people are receiving love letters, they're not critiquing it like that at all. Uh, they can feel what the emotion is. And that's also why I do this service, is to help people find the words that fit what they're feeling. But it's a I just think when we're thinking about getting all of our preparations ready, or getting our ducks in a row, it can feel very administrative on a lot of levels. It can feel, like this long to-do list of things that, like you're preparing for the trip. It's different than the trip. And when I think of this piece of the legacy, I imagine the receiver of that letter having that not only in the immediate aftermath, but that carries on for the rest of their lives and potentially for the rest of lives of the next generation, because that then becomes its own piece of history, that my mom held on to this letter from her mom, that kind of thing. So I just think it's an overlooked kind of part of all of this. Um, and I'm a big fan of people actually writing these at different stages in life. I just turned 48, and I've written my forever letters to my three kids. And I intend to, I would like to be here until I'm 108. So I will keep on adding to it, or I'll see how it goes, in another decade or so. I might just write a whole new letter, but I I just know my kids won't complain if there are eight of them or six of them or three of them or whatever it will be, because that's just more to hold on to of a perspective around this valuable kind of love. And as we know, feelings are fleeting unless they're captured with words and written down. They don't they're impermanent in the sense of other people knowing about them. And then we rely on our memories of somebody saying something about how they felt. And our memories are pretty unreliable. But when you have something written down from the other person of how they felt, and it has nothing to do with inheritance, it has nothing to do with the kind of worth that our attorneys care about. Um, that's sustaining for the spirit and the soul and the life of the receiver.
Let's talk about grief a little bit. Um,
Okay.
and, especially around death, it's so overwhelming. It is so consuming, even for the person who is ill and who's dying. There is that anticipatory grief. They're grieving also.
Mm.
How do these letters, I'm assuming they provide, and I could envision it, provide a lot of comfort to both the writer and the receiver. So let's talk about that for a bit.
Absolutely. As one writes these letters, it is a relief to find the words to what you're feeling. It is like putting a period at the end of a sentence relief. It is to have the words to be able to fall back on, takes away this feeling of, people say, I just don't have the words for it. And that's a feeling that you're saying it's just so much of something that I don't know how to explain it. But once you do explain that feeling, it's a relief because you have the words, you have this tether of what it's meant and what it feels like. And for me, and I'm not dying, so it's a different experience for me having written them, but I can live in the relationship with my kids a little bit differently now that I've written them
Mm.
because I know what it is that I value the most about them. I know what it is that I'm most grateful for. And I've been able to articulate really my hopes for them. And therefore, in my way, I'm someone who prays. I can pray for that in my quiet moments for them. I've thought of the words, I've thought of what I want for them. So I think for somebody who's dying, it would alleviate some anxiety of, but do they really know? Will they really know? Because this is so important to me. At the end of my life, I can count maybe on my fingers the things that really matter to me, and I want that person to know more than anything else. And so it does that, it satisfies that. And I think in the grieving process, because this is a young part of my business, I don't have any firsthand experience from clients of mine whose loved ones have received the letters, but I can tell you from a dear friend of mine who is one of my mentors in this life. She's in her 60s and she had a very challenging relationship with her mom. And her mom passed when she was young. Her mom passed more than half of her life ago, and when she was in her early 30s. And her mom did write her a love letter, and she keeps it in her bedroom in her 60s. She keeps this letter in her bedroom still. And her relationship with her mother was so challenging. And my mentor shared the letter with me. She sent a photograph of it to me. And it was a validating letter for her to just really know that her mom, despite all the challenges, really loved her, really believed in her, really saw great value in her personhood, even though they clashed in a lot of ways throughout her life and even went through stages where they were not in touch. So that means something that her daughter has held on to that letter for longer than her mom was even with her. And I hold that as a real sign that a forever letter can support in a very positive way the grieving process for those who are left behind.
I've When I've worked with people on legacy projects, some of them writing, some of them video, um, there is always this sense of relief that they got out what they needed to say.
Mm,
But not only that they got out what they needed to say, but they got out what their life was.
mm,
And that it wasn't going to be forgotten,
mm.
that they weren't going to be forgotten, and that their life meant something. So there's that aspect, and the people who are receiving, it's a part of history once that person is gone, that if you don't have it down, that it's gone. And it's not only about that person's life, but it is your entire family. That's you. That's where you come from.
Mhm.
So, you talk about this being part of the legacy of the family
Mm,
of, my, I have my grand, my mother held on to her mother's letter, and now
mhm.
I could see it. That's part of me, as you
It
were
is.
saying.
It's this incredible tapestry that we're all made out of. And it's like, I think of my great grandmother, who my dad really feels like we're so connected. I would never know that if he hadn't said that. It helps me better understand myself, right? That he can talk about her and seeing who she was as she aged and an older woman, and how some choices she made, that helps me just better know myself, that I came from her. And so there's that oral legacy, but now I've written down the story. I have written it down because I'm trying to capture my dad's story, my great grandmother's story. I want it there. And I agree with you. I think at the end of our lives, we do want to know that there's meaning there, that there was something that people can look back at us and say, that life really meant something in the context of our family, of our lives. And so I think that's a big part of it too.
I'm sure great grandmother appreciates what you've done, and the story that you've conveyed.
I hope so. I hope that she feels like some part of her is still here through me.
Yeah.
I hope that. Because she deserves that. She had a lot of hard years as a woman, and I'm not saying everything is totally there for women yet, but it's better than it was for her. And I I kind of just feel her with me. It's nice to feel supported in that way as you're living through life, to feel like you have ancestors who are cheering you on or connecting with you in various ways. And that simply wouldn't have happened if those series of events hadn't happened around the bee. And it's also neat because even though my dad, I think, is a little skeptical, because every time I see a bee, I'm like, there's your great grandma, there's your grandma. He's kind of like, oh, Lindsay. But it's funny,
Yeah.
even when a bee's being terribly annoying, I don't get upset. And everyone's like, it's a bee. It's still, it's annoying. And I'm like, no, but I'm okay with bees now. But even my dad, as a gift once, for my birthday, right around that time, he found this necklace that was this tiny little jar with an eighth of a teaspoon of honey in it.
Mm,
And he gave it to me. And I was just, it just, her message of what she said in that, it wasn't a podcast at that time, it was a radio show from, I think it was, I'm forgetting what year it was, but I think it was 1958. Um, had an impact on my dad when he was 78 years old
mm.
in the year 2020.
Amazing
And he
story.
gave me a gift to make that connection. So I guess it's all to say, there's a lot of mystery here when we leave this kind of legacy. You don't necessarily know how it's all going to land and whose hands it's going to be in. There's no way. I just know in my gut that my great grandmother was not thinking, I will have a great granddaughter who's going to, think about this someday and listen, hear this. I'm sure she wasn't thinking that, just like I'm not thinking about that myself. But I do think it's really powerful that that happened. And it only happened because she did leave some of her words out there to be found and held on to.
Everyone's story is important, and you just don't know, that the legacy it will
100%.
leave. You spoke about before how people don't believe that they are good writers. And
Mhm.
I know how overwhelming it could be, What advice would you give to someone who feels overwhelmed by the idea of even starting a letter, love letter?
My first advice would be to start so casually that you think it's not even appropriate for a letter. So to just create some context, like just how you would say it. Like, well, the fact that you're reading this letter means that I've passed. That's what you're going through. Like, just start like that. Like, put ourselves in that time and place and make a connection there. And then do what you know in the letter, just write what you already know how to do, is to nurture that person through your words, to show care. You're writing this letter because you love this person. So just right off the bat, just say, and I'm so sorry that that's what you're going through right now. I love you. And this is really hard. It must be.
Nice.
And I want you to know. And that's when you go into the deeper stuff. But just be you in the beginning. Don't put pressure on yourself that this has to be the most beautiful love letter that's ever written and it's going to be published somewhere. Don't think like that. Don't. I used to tell this to my high school students. So often we edit ourselves before we even give our words a chance. Just let it just let it just put it out there. All the likes and ums and passive verbs, just put it all in there. And then once you get into that deeper stuff, that's where it gets a little trickier, but at least you've started writing. And what does it feel like for you to love this person? What does it feel like for you? A lot of I statements. Try that. And you don't have to be this great teacher. You don't have to impart this great wisdom. Just be you and say what it feels like to be you loving this person. And from there, you'll start to, I think, get into a flow.